Welcome to this presentation to help you measure your carbon footprint using the government greenhouse gas conversion factors tables that help you identify your usage in terms of scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3. My name is Eugene Bryce. I'm with Bryce Energy Services and I'll be going through the process of how you use these tables and use an example company. So our example company has gathered the following information. They have 500,000 kilowatts of electricity, 250,000 kilowatts of gas, 200,000 miles traveled by delivery vehicles, and so on. And what we have in brackets here is the source for the data. So electricity, very simply from the electricity bill. Similarly for the gas bill. Miles traveled by delivery vehicles, vehicle telemetry. Miles traveled by staff to work. So this business is trying to capture all of its carbon impact. So without going into too much detail, we have scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3. So broadly, scope 1 and scope 2 are what the business is directly responsible for in terms of carbon emissions. Scope 3 is what the business is indirectly responsible for. So third party carbon emissions, but are required for that business to undertake its business. So staff traveling to work, how the staff travel is the responsibility of the staff for their carbon, but it is necessary for the staff to get to work in order for the business to operate. So, well, home working aside this year, but generally. Other items, a lot of businesses sometimes forget, water used within the business is measurable in terms of carbon. That's actually scope 3 because it's the water company that is directly responsible for the carbon, but the business is using the water. Similarly, short-haul flights for sales staff. The airline is directly responsible for the carbon, but because the business is sending the person on the plane, you're indirectly responsible for that carbon. And that's why that is scope 3. So the UK government produce effectively conversion factors for each of these types of emissions by business. And there's also a guidance document available, both of which I will link to on my website or associated with the social media post. But these conversion factors are used by the government for regulatory performance monitoring, and there is a legal requirement on certain sizes of business to report their carbon footprint on an annual basis as a part of the director's report or other reports from the business, such as ESOS. So the greenhouse gas conversion spreadsheets or conversion factors are effectively an Excel spreadsheet, and this is for 2019. And these spreadsheets describe on a very granular level, and this is just an example of the fuels page from scope 1. So if you're a business and you use diesel 100%, you can measure it in tons, litres, kilowatt hours, net CV or gross calorific value, net calorific value. And effectively, if you are using 1 ton of diesel, that is equivalent to 3,205.55 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. So as a business, you need to determine your total tonnage or total litres or total kilowatt hours of diesel that you have used in a year, multiply it by the conversion factor, and you will get your kilograms CO2 equivalent figure. Just as a note, this is more for those that would use water or steam in process, and the distinction between gross calorific value and net calorific value for steam. So most companies are advised to use the gross calorific value. So back to the example data. Firstly, we'll convert it into this table, and what you can see is firstly some of the items seem to have doubled up. So electricity has doubled up, delivery vehicles, staff commuting, water usage. So electricity is primarily scope 2 for a business. So that's the electricity the business actually uses. But also there's a scope 3 electricity usage, which considers the transmission and distribution loss. Now it's the energy company, your local national grid and your local distribution company, that is responsible for it. But indirectly, because you've used the electricity, it's recorded as scope 2, but also you have to identify the emissions associated with scope 3. Delivery vehicles. This business, or this example business, has two classes, class 2 and class 1. And class 2, the data source is the tachograph within the vehicles. So effectively you're recording the actual mileage of each of the vehicles. Second type of vehicle, where it's a class 1 type vehicle, it's diesel, and we're recording the actual litres consumed by that vehicle. Now in this example, ideally you would have the litres for both, because that would be more accurate, because some drivers can drive very efficiently and other drivers not for the same mileage. So in order to be very accurate, you should be using the litres. Staff commuting, so this is third scope 3, and these figures have been sourced from a staff survey. And unfortunately on the staff survey, the type of car, it has been just described as small or medium. And we'll see later greater granularity may be required in order to determine the exact or a more accurate measure for the scope 3 staff commuting. Water use. Some businesses may be surprised, but water does have a carbon footprint, both water in and water out. So water in is your clean drinking water in, and water out is your waste. And again, this business has used 10,000, so it's 10,000 cube for both in and 10,000 cube out. And the source of the data is water bill. Waste refuse, landfill, waste transfer notes measured in tons, and we've said 50 tons, and this is a scope 3. Finally, air travel. We've said short haul business travel. The source for this information is expenses, and we have number of flights. And again, this is scope 3 because it's the responsibility of the airline for your travel. So this is my version of the government greenhouse gas emissions spreadsheets. So I've added my own front page. This is all the original document, so we are looking at 2019, and each of the pages has information that's useful for describing which element you should be looking at, and a nice index to all the pages. I'm using the enhanced spreadsheet. There is a simplified greenhouse gas emission spreadsheet that you can use, just because I look at more detail generally. So I've added a little total sheet, so as you work through the individual sheets, it just calculates the total for me. And also I have subtotaled each of the individual sheets by scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3. So I have coloured all of scope 1 sheets green, all of scope 2 sheets blue, and finally scope 3, I'll call it brown. So what we want to do now is start plugging in the individual elements that we have identified. So firstly, we're looking at electricity, scope 2 for the actual consumed electricity by the business, scope 3 to account for the T&D losses, and the unit is kilowatt hours and 500,000, 500,000. So go back to our sheet. So simply scope 2. So this is where you just simply start plugging in numbers. Had a number there, so replace that with 500,000. And we get total CO2 equivalent 127,800. So simply, and we're in tons, so 127.8. So electricity used 500,000. We've got 127.8. So we're looking at, in the year 2019, per kilowatt hour, we have 500,000 units, electricity generated units, 500,000, and what we can see here is that gives us a figure of 127,800, and I want that in tons, so this is kilograms to tons, 127.8. I'll just put a 0 there, just for nice to have two decimal places. And then obviously we have the pure CO2 figure, and then we have the methane figure, and then we have nitrous oxide figure of 685 kilograms, 325 kilograms, and that's just a point that came from the original spreadsheet. So that's our first one off. Let's go back. Now we want the same for scope 3 T&D losses. So along our sheet to scope 3, UK T&D for EV, transmission and distribution. So what we have here is UK electricity. So this is the efficiency losses in the network, and it's scope 3 because it's the responsibility of the electricity distribution companies. So again, move on a bit quicker, 500,000 units, and we have a CO2e of 10,850. So if I go back to my, so in tons, 10.85. Job done. So calculating T&D. Next one, gas, straight gas used for heat, boiler, burning in the boiler for heating, water and central heating perhaps. So we have 250 kilowatts. and this is scope 1. So scope 1, fuels, natural gas. I've rolled it up. Natural gas. Hopefully I'll zoom in a bit, maybe. Oops. And if we go back, we have actually kilowatt hours, and we'll be using the gross figure. And so if I highlight that, I left a figure in here, let's clear that just for completeness. So what do we say? 250,000. So 25. Oh, sorry. Oops. Just be careful when you're entering these numbers. There's so many tables that you could get cross-eyed entering the numbers. So 250,000 kilowatt hours of natural gas. That gives us 46,107 kilograms CO2 equivalent. So let's plug that in our table. So that's again in tons, so 46.107. Now, what we can do ideally is round that up to 2 decimal places, should be sufficient. So I'll just call it 1.1. Moving on, getting there, delivery vehicles. So delivery vehicles, again, scope 1. And just on the zoom out here, you can see there's quite a selection of vehicles and types. So if I zoom in a bit, so we have delivery vans, and under delivery vans we have a type, so class 1, class 2, class 3, and unit is in kilometer miles. So what do we have? So we've identified delivery vehicles class 2, TACO, miles, and we have 175,000 miles. So there's a distinction here. So we're looking at class 2 miles. So this line, if you like, but there's also an option, are they diesel or petrol? So we should identify class 2, and I'll say they're diesel. So class 2 diesel, 175,000 miles. So again, using my so there's all sorts of options: plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, battery electric, which will shortly become the norm. So just to remind myself, we're on this line. Again, make sure you enter in the right line. So 175,000. So 175,000 miles. Again, no harm, just triple checking myself. Class 2 miles vans. And I'll just zoom in a little as if it helps. So we get a figure of 54,792. So 54.79. Again, we've said this is a diesel, but it's pure liters. So what we can do is go to fuels and activities, liquid fuels. solid fuels. So we have diesel, litres, and what did we say? It was 2,500. 2,500, and that, so 2,500 litres of diesel equates to 6,717 kilograms. So livery fuel, what did I say? So 6.72 tons of CO2. So 2,500 litres. I think I said 50 by 50. So 50 litres a week, 50 weeks of the year. Is that reasonable? But 6.72 tons of CO2 equivalent. Commuting, staff commuting by car. This is scope 3, and let's go and add that. So we'll go with business travel land as the closest, and we have again a large vehicle, cars owned by employees, so effectively commuting to work. And what we've said is in our survey, staff survey, commuting by car, small and medium. So we have 30,000, 20,000. Now this is a bit inaccurate. Ideally we should know the exact size of the car and ideally the petrol consumption, but hey ho. So 30,000 for small. So cars by market segment. We'll use Super Mini for small. And I'll just clarify that. Mini, and so, and we have miles, again it's asking for petrol. We'll assume most of these are petrol, or we can take a view. So we have 30,000 miles. Cars by market segment, petrol or diesel. So if I put 20,000, or if I put just for a quick look, 15,000, split it half and half. So the petrol has higher emissions than the diesel for the equivalent. Always interesting to know. Just for simplicity, I'll just keep it as we have on the table. 30,000, Super Mini, 30,000, and we had 20,000 for, I'll say, upper medium for the managers in the business or the car enthusiasts. 30,000, 20,000. So that was upper medium. So I'll just make that a note. So what we have, I'll zoom in. Taking little longer, but it's worth the effort. So super mini 30,000, 7,500, so 7.50 tons. And for the upper medium, 6.692, so I'll call it 6.70 tons. Say that so I don't lose my work. Oops, lost my Excel. There we go. Next one. Water use in, water use out, 10,000 cubic meters. So a lot of businesses, again, water is an important contributor. Also, water saving, all businesses should be really thinking about it, because water will become the commodity of the future. So let me see if I can find water to supply and water treatment here. So water to supply, again, we have million liters or cubic meters. So ours was in cubic meters, so 10,000, 3,440. So 3.40 tons. Water use out. Excuse me, water treatment, again, cubic. So same in, metered in, is assumed to go out unless you have other uses on site that you can derogate. And 7,080. So 7.80. So water in 3.4, water out 7.8. So a little over twice as much carbon in water treatment than in clean water in. Excuse me, makes sense. Waste, refuse. Waste disposal. So there's many options depending on how you deal with waste from your business. We're having probably worst case scenario, all going to landfill, 50 tons. So I just note construction waste materials, refuse, electrical items, fridges, freezers, all of this should be included in Scope 3 if you have significant activities or disposals with that type of material. So here we are, refuse, we'll just call it municipal waste. And then there's various options, whether you reuse it, open loop, closed loop, send it for combustion, composting, landfill. So there's an example, it's municipal waste, you can't compost it. Anaerobic digestion in part, but this is going unfortunately to landfill. So and again note this is in kilograms. So I said 50 tons, so where's landfill? Just let me double check that. I'm saying, oh, excuse me, the unit is tons, so I'm okay. The output is in kilograms of CO2, but the unit in is tons, so it's always good to check. Oh, wrong box. Next one along, 50. Yeah, so kilograms, 29,300 325. So where's our, so 29.33. And finally, we have air travel. Again, it's scope 3 because it's the airline that's responsible for the carbon output. So let's go to one along. Business travel air, long haul, short haul, business class, and we said 75 flights. So that's kilometers. We had 75 flights. So what we need to do is estimate the kilometers. So 75 average short haul business class, let's say 500 kilometers. Oops, excuse me. Get my formula right. So 37,500. Normally these are available on the ticket. So if we update that, business number, and then add 500 kilometer. So that's obviously something we can look at, get the actual kilometer range for the short haul. And what we have here is 8,760. So 8.76. Now, there's just note on this, if I come back, we have flights with RF, flights without RF, and the guidance up here with the sheet, radiative forcing. Now, if you have any degree in physics, might be able to help. Measure of the additional environmental impact of aviation. These include emissions of nitrous oxides and water vapor when emitted at high altitude. Organizations should include the influence of radioactive forcing. Capture, however, should be noted. So basically what they're saying is there's some uncertainty as to the accuracy of the figures, but better to report it, particularly as it's scope 3, and as these sheets evolve, you can fine-tune it, and as the science evolves, again, it can be fine-tuned. So that completes our little table. So having said all that, this gives us the final table of data used by the business. So we've added the detail, super mini, medium car, short business. We've estimated the average flight distance, but perhaps next year we'll record the actual kilometers or miles of the flights, so we can again get a more accurate number for that scope 3 activity. So in order to look at the individual totals now of scope 3, so scope 3, we have landfill and our business flights. Scope 2, we have UK electricity generated, and scope 1, we have our vans, fuels, so that was our diesel, and gaseous fuels, so that was our natural gas for heating. So to give us a total for scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3. So totals, again, that's just carried through. So total greenhouse gas emissions for scope 1 and 2 in kilograms, and then total for scope 1 and 2 in tons. So this example business has CO2 equivalent emissions in tons of 235.42, this number here. And that is what the business is directly responsible for, taking into account upstream and downstream carbon emissions related to the business but not the responsibility. You add in scope 3, and that gives us a total of 313.95 tons. But for most formal reporting, your requirement is simply scope 1 and 2, but to understand the entire impact of the business, you should be including your scope 3 and looking to reduce all the carbon amounts. So finally, from our spreadsheet, we can see for our representative example business, total CO2e for scope 1 and scope 2 of 235.42 tons of CO2 equivalent gas being emitted. So if you would like additional resource or a copy of my version of the greenhouse gas factors spreadsheet, feel free to visit my website and use the user login with your Google or Facebook account. Don't worry, there's no credit card payments or anything like that. It's just simply a login so I can register who's visited my site, or just drop me an email. So to contact Bryce Energy Services, simply drop an email to info@bryceenergyservices.com. Have a visit of the website, and if you would like any further assistance with greenhouse gas protocols, scope 1, 2 or 3, and the difficult bit of actually reducing your carbon emissions and energy usage, drop me a line. Thank you very much.